Every empire has its glory days, but that must all come to an end. And today we will discuss how we are living in a world that is worse than 1984. These are the last days of an empire. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Let's get into this article right here out of Reuters. John Hood, the former president of the John Locke Foundation, found that by keeping state and local tax and regulatory burdens as low as possible fosters economic growth. And I would just like to jump in here and say that anytime you have the burden such as taxation and regulations, you are going to hurt growth. This is something that I've been discussing throughout my book, throughout these videos since day one. And now we have this gentleman who has analyzed 681 peer-reviewed academic journals going back to 1990. Most studies find that lower levels of taxes and spending, less intrusive regulation, correlate with stronger economic performance. When you remove the burdens from the people, they will prosper. And that is something that has happened throughout history. We have seen it. Of course, it doesn't occur very often, but through these periodic instances, we see how things do well when they don't have the taxation burden, when they don't have all this regulations that does nothing but put a stranglehold around the economy. So this is pretty interesting. Now I'm going to go into some issues here that would definitely tell you that we are headed for worsening conditions. What is a carbon tax? So the carbon tax is usually defined as a tax based on greenhouse gas emissions. Now this may seem like something that is a very good idea. We don't want pollution. Pollution is bad. But undoubtedly, this is being abused. And all this does is create profits for the companies who are controlling this. They will say that it always puts the money back into the people's pockets, but that is just not the case. Because what happens is, if a factory is going to produce carbon emissions in Canada or the US, for example, and they are going to be taxed because of it, they're simply going to move to a country that does not have these regulations in place. And those countries will continue to pollute. And of course, their factories, for example, coal burning plants in the US and in US, for example, are significantly cleaner than the ones that burn in China, for example. So we have a real big problem right here when we are not looking into the real situation. And then you add on top of this, just to throw in this little detail, that most nuclear power plants are leaking radiation. But of course, that's clean according to those who propose the carbon tax. But let's take that one further. So let's say you are a proponent of the carbon taxes. What about this? How do you feel about this? The Washington State Transportation Commission is expected to approve a pilot project designed to charge drivers for every mile they travel on public roads. This is part of some local news here, but we've seen this actually wanting to take place in many different cities, many different states in the US, and also being talked about elsewhere. We even see how countries such as Germany are going to phase out single family dwellings because that is just not really good for the pollution that's being created. We need to condense people into shoeboxes like they do in Manhattan micro lofts, as they call them. Anyway, to get back to this, a GPS device would track miles driven and charge accordingly. Well, that's just so loving that they'll put that GPS in there to monitor and track your every move. But of course, we have seen this all before. We know where this is headed. Sure, it is obviously bad to create pollution. We do not want to have so many cars on the road causing the pollution, but charging people for that behavior is not going to fix the problem. It's simply going to siphon more money away from the people. I have been warning about this now for quite some time because I know specifically that this will be implemented. Everyone is going to have to pay for every mile they drive, and that's just the way it's going to be because they allow these regulations to go over us. Let's go on to this right here. Many people don't even know about this, and it is still considered, even today, still considered a conspiracy theory, even though the agenda itself was leaked. There were Freedom of Information Act that were released to the public, and it was known to be real. Let's look at this. This is back in 2006, Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel in Alberta, Canada, where the heads of state and a few others met to sign an agreement, the SPP. And basically they colluded together in secret meeting. So we had the Canadian Prime Minister and the presidents of the United States and Mexico gathering together, signing the SPP, and essentially forming what could be at some point later down the road what people are calling the North American Union. Now, of course, that isn't exactly what has happened, but it always starts with these treaties, with these sort of agreements that form together, and then later on they become full-out unions. That's what happened with the euro. They did not think that this would ever happen. The EU, they thought it was a conspiracy theory. But back in the 50s, when this really began, it was just a treaty, just trying to get some organization put together. And then we had these different treaties, different acts, different agreements that come together, and eventually they form into a union. And we see this happening as we go closer and closer to what they themselves are calling global governance. This is not my words, these are their words. And this is just one more example of how they meet in secrecy to get these things done. Why didn't they hold a public conference about it? Because they know whenever there is light being shined on these, they will find out the real deal, and that is because it is bad. The inexplicable war on lemonade stands. This is just one article, but you can see literally, and I mean this literally, hundreds and hundreds of this example. Lemonade stands are being persecuted for some of the strangest reasons. This has been going on forever. Children trying to make a few pennies, basically trying to charge for lemonade and other little simple things on the side of the road. And of course, they are being persecuted for this. And this is just going to show you how the government creates the regulations and laws not to help the people. Because look at this situation. This is being done all over the US and in the whole world, in fact. This is something that I don't even really want to get into. I'm going to mention quickly. I'm going to move off of it. This is Senator Nancy Schaefer, basically talking about the corrupt business of child protective services, also getting into the fact that, the problems with the foster care and how people are more often likely to be abused under the foster care system. So oftentimes what we'll see is that parents have their children taken away from them for things that could be serious, or they may not be serious at all. And oftentimes they're taken away and they're put into foster care and are even more likely to be abused. And this is something that obviously was a problem for Senator Nancy Schaefer. But you can't ask her, and you cannot ask her husband, because just after she went public with this information, they were both murdered. And that just goes to show you the real deal. Let's move on. Venezuela textbooks teach math, science, and socialism. This article is out of the ABC, but essentially what I wanted to get into was the fact that you have this, what they are calling socialist environment. And I just talked about in a previous video how well according to them, how well socialism is doing, and we see the absolute fact that the people are literally starving out there. They can't even get soap to clean themselves. And here we are, they're teaching socialism in the schools. Look at what communism, socialism has done in the 20th century alone, murdering 262 million people in democide, death by government. And it is not going to work. It never has worked. This type of behavior, you cannot do this. When you have freedom, when you have less regulation, when you have less taxation, when you increase the prosperity of the people by these means, you will allow the economy to rise to new heights. But until you do that, you're going to have an economy that continues to sink. That's the message that I've been trying to share in all of these previous hundreds and hundreds of videos that I've done, is this message right here. So in my book, I said, you don't need to be a quote-unquote guru to make good choices. You need some financial education and common sense. And the reason I mentioned financial education, because that's what I wanted to do with these videos, with my book, is just to educate the people on finance. Because you go to school and you go through your grade school, you go through your high school, and perhaps even into college and university, and you don't learn a single thing about your own personal financial education. And that's why they're able to scam us with these tools that they use with inflation, with the bail-ins, with all these other sorts of things, because we just figure, well, we'll leave it up to the politicians, we'll leave it up to the economists to make these decisions because they know what they're doing. I don't know what I'm doing. But if we just have a very good foundation, a basic foundation of knowledge, and then we continue to maintain that a little bit every day, we will know exactly when they are trying to screw us over. Let's move on right here. Talking about school, the average college freshman reads at a 7th grade level. And that's a scary thought when we think about how bad the conditions are getting. See, these schools aren't helping people. They're not able to actually educate the people. I mean, it's pretty amazing to read this when you think about it. If you want to know the in-depth detail about this, you need to get The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America by Charlotte Thompson Iserby. She gets into everything historically. It goes back and it's a chronological order. I suggest reading the abridged version. That's the one I read, and basically chronologically just details everything about the education system, about how they're bringing in this sort of global governance scheme, and how they're removing all the checks and balances which allows the mega corporations to control our governments. And one last thing right here, college costs surge 500% in the US since 1985. You can see the chart at the bottom there. This article is out of Bloomberg, but all I wanted to mention from this was that even though our education system is a failure, the people are paying more and more for it. But this is not just the education system. This goes with our food. We're getting worse quality food that is devoid of minerals, devoid of enzymes, and we are seeing the radical effects of that. Then you put on top of that the GMO, genetic modification of the foods. You see how they're able to tweak and twist and turn the actual genetic structure of these plants in order to satisfy some need that they have, whether it's drought resistance, whether it's being able to withstand colder temperatures, or what have you, playing with nature itself. And this is not getting any better in the world. They're making it worse and worse and worse. And every time they tweak and twist something, whether that's the financial world, whether that's with our food supply, it just makes things worse. And we are seeing the consequences right now. We're far beyond 1984. We surpassed what George Orwell was thinking about. We surpassed what Aldous Huxley from Brave New World was thinking about. And this is gone far beyond anything that we could have ever have imagined. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up and don't forget to become an insider. The Insiders is where I give out all my best intel for free. That is available at themoneygps.com. Just scroll down to the bottom, fill in your email address, and you get occasional emails from me with good, short, concise info.